This week we are joined by the lovely Sarah Game, who is a member of the Upper House in South Australia.
It's really hard to get to the bottom of why this has been put forward. I mean, it's absolutely pointless. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars.
What does that fight look like? Because you guys are ahead of that already with a voice.
You really have to vote no. We need to be putting money into tangible solutions.
They're not really elected, are they?
People are very concerned about the education of our children in schools.
Kids are looking for stability.
Yes.
And something that's as binary as sex is no longer stable.
When did we agree that this is what we wanted in our schools?
Maybe this is why anxiety and depression is at record highs.
Yes. Most people are struggling just to survive, and they just don't have the time or energy to create a level of fight back.
I've said enough. Love your work. These are the sorts of books that are out there, guys. Here you go. Got The Queer Chameleon. This is where our tax dollars are going.
That just makes absolutely no sense. I mean, we see...
Confusing me.
It's confusing. Exactly. Adults are confused all the time, and we see adults come out confused about all sorts of things, don't we?
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another conversation with Joel Jammal from Turning Point Australia. This week we are joined by the lovely Sarah Game, who is a member of the Upper House in South Australia. She's what we call a member of the Legislative Council. On a state level, that's the Upper House, and in a federal level, that would be called a senator. And Sarah is someone of immense knowledge. We've got an excellent conversation planned, scheduled. We're going to be talking about The Voice. We're going to be talking about South Australia and their treaty. We're going to be talking about some of the LGBTQ indoctrination in the schools, some of her work with mental health and plans for how we can help the family law court system. And I'm really looking forward to having a very candid discussion and giving you a platform to get some of the One Nation policies out and talk about how we can improve this country and bring some transparency. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for coming and making time. One of the things I love about South Australia is the relationship that you have with some of the good Liberals, some of the poor Liberals. You really don't care. You just call it out how you see it. And many Liberals, they love that. Many Liberals, not a fan. But you're someone of conviction. Going to The Voice, One Nation was very early onto this. I listened to Pauline Hanson at a Monicus League event in Sydney, and she called this out very early on.
She did.
Why is it that this proposal has been put forward from Anthony Albanese? Because, as you know, there's a lot of more relevant issues going on.
Yes.
Cost of living, which we'll talk about later. But he decided to make this his priority. He said it in his victory speech. What's the go with that?
Well, why it's been put forward, I mean, I think, distraction from real issues. And also, I think possibly just to benefit, a few people. I think it's really hard to get to the bottom of why this has been put forward. I mean, it's absolutely pointless. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars now on a referendum that's going to help nobody, and that's created a huge amount of division. I mean, certainly, as you said, we came out first in this state about being against the state-based voice that unfortunately did get legislated. And to be clear, because I guess there's different reasons why people are against the voice to Parliament at a state or federal level, but certainly for One Nation it wasn't about detail or lack of detail, although it's ridiculous the amount of detail that's been put forward for such a proposal, but it's actually, for us, the whole concept. So certainly I don't believe, and I believe certainly One Nation don't believe in any race-based policies going forward. So for us, there was no level of detail that would make a legislated voice or a voice referendum a good idea. And there's lots of reasons for that. I mean, firstly, many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are actually doing really well. I think something like 80% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are doing as well as non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And, that's a really good thing. They get educated, they work, they contribute positively in society. And also, it's getting really difficult to be able to tell, well, who is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander? Yeah. And that's because actually a lot of reconciliation is going on. There's a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are intermarrying with non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So that's a positive thing. But once you start making certain rights and privileges and accessibilities for one group, you can't avoid this focus on race. Which I think is a really negative thing. So for me, we don't know who's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. Many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are actually doing well. And in fact, the vast majority of people who are struggling are not Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders when you look at who's in poverty and who's homeless.
Yeah.
So for us, it's actually quite obvious that the way forward is supporting people based on need, not based on their ancestry or their heritage or their race.
Yeah, look, I actually got my my ballot in the mail for our last federal election. I was sick, so I applied for a mail-in ballot, and it's become the best thing for showing the audience how to vote. So I did receive this, and a lot of people have been wondering, what does this ballot look like? They've heard a lot of the talk around the box and the ticks and the crosses and the AECs playing all these funny games. And I just wanted to let everyone know, that's what it looks like, guys. That's my real ballot I'm going to hand in. So I'm going to fill this out, and I'm going to hand it in on election day. I'm going to hand it as a declaration vote, and I'm going to write no. But if I was still wondering, why should I vote no? What's probably your number 3 sort of arguments against this thing? You've mentioned that it's not, it's based on race. It's not actually helping, the Aboriginals really in need, the 20%. What else have you got to really solidify my no?
Well, I think the fact is that the vast majority of people want to do the right thing by that 20% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are living in despairing conditions. And they also want to do the right thing by all those people who are non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander who are living in despairing conditions. And so for me, if we let this voice referendum get up, we've got to accept that we've voted for a blank check into a bottomless pit with no transparency and no accountability. We have to understand the obvious fact that we have limited resources. So if we choose to do that, we have to be prepared for every other aspect of society to fail and be underfunded.
Yeah.
So I think it's critical, if we want to do the right thing by those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are in despairing conditions, and you want to do the right thing by those non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are in despairing conditions, you really have to vote no. We need to be putting money into tangible solutions, and we need to be putting money into areas where we've got transparency and accountability. Obviously, additionally to that, as you mentioned, we have already seen the enormous level of division that this has created. The damage, certain level of damage has been done, but if it gets up, we're stuck with it.
Yeah, look, I'm very much worried about it. When we had the Nigel Farage show in September last year, we brought Senator Hanson up, Senator Malcolm Roberts up, but I also brought up from WA Professor Augusto Zimmerman. This is in September last year. I asked him, my understanding is they're going to legislate this. If we vote for it, it gives, as you said, a blank check to the Parliament of the day, which is right now federally a Labor Greens coalition, and they will legislate whatever they want with the key in the door. With this referendum done, if it's a yes, they can legislate anything really, and the sky's the limit. So I can't honestly tell them that, for example, the members are going to be democratically elected, that Aboriginal people are going to get a fair vote. They're going to be they could be selected. We don't know. We just don't know. And I think that's the scariest thing about this. The actual wording on this particular ballot, if you didn't see it before, guys, is a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? Write yes or no. And again, here's the ballot right there. The government has sent out a referendum booklet which has no colour. It just has the actual arguments for yes and no. But it very much feels like the deck has been stacked against the no side. All the big corporates donating to the yes side, and the Electoral Commission I think their social media team should be completely sacked after the debacle that Rukshan covered. If you noticed that, with the purple signage being exactly the same as the Electoral Commission's purple signage. There is something going on here with regards to the political establishment, and I think it's very much coming out with the voice. Why do you think that you're a mother, you're someone out of the political system. Why do you think that there is this political establishment pushing so hard for the voice when many Aboriginal people on the ground don't want this thing?
Well, it's very difficult to answer that when it seems to really have no value other than do more of the same. I mean, I guess they've touted around the fact that this is about doing something different for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. You know, we've already tried a whole range of other ideas that have failed, whereas really this is actually the same idea on a grander scale. It's about giving money into the ether with no accountability, no transparency, and no understanding really of how it's going to create real tangible benefits. So I think they thought, I mean, honestly, I think they thought this idea would be more popular than it has been, if I'm honest, which is a little bit embarrassing because it's really, really backfired. So I think that may have been part of it, and of course it's a good distraction from the real issues that people are facing, and whenever we're divided, it's harder for people to focus on the real issues and demand action about those issues as well, and that's certainly what's happened.
It's such a shame because you'd think that, like, the way the polling's going right now, and we should take it with a grain of salt. Looks like the no side's going to win, maybe even in a landslide, maybe about 55 to 45 or even 60 to 40, which I'm predicting. If you turn out and you actually vote, guys. South Australia has a treaty process.
A voice process.
A voice process,
yes.
Right. And you put a bill up to repeal that.
That's right.
What is the, what's the go with that? I mean, you guys are going to have to keep fighting this fight even after the election, and we're seeing it pop up in other states. In New South Wales, there's $5 million allocated to a treaty-making process. So the treaty-making process is getting started in other states like Queensland and Victoria.
Yes.
What does that fight look like? Because you guys are ahead of that already with a voice.
Well, I think it's really important to say that the legislated voice, and that's right, we went ahead and legislated South Australian based voice to Parliament without consulting the South Australian people, and it went through on the 26th of March this year. I certainly voted against it and made that clear right from the very beginning. But what's really important to state is that voice in no way supersedes or impedes any of the other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations. So they're still going to exist. When we're talking about funding and resourcing, this is intended to be an additional layer on top. For me, it was really interesting and upsetting that we were able to legislate something that really contained absolutely no detail or commitment from the government. So in the legislation, it doesn't stipulate the number of regions or the number of people that will be involved in the state-based voice. So it's a very fluid piece of legislation that can be easily expanded. But as it sits at the moment, South Australia will have 46 members in the state-based voice.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, and different from the normal running of Parliament, where members are the same members who will be involved in committees, it's actually stipulated in the legislation that committee members for the voice must be in addition to the local First Nation voice members. So if you're one of the 46 First Nation voice members, you can't be involved in the committee. And we've already got 55 members that will be involved in the committee, as well as a voice secretariat that will help run the voice. So we're looking at well over 100 people, but the way that the legislation is written is it's very easily expanded. So that's really just the beginning for South Australia. What's also interesting is that those 100 people or so, they don't have many obligations. So they can be asked to attend Parliament and they can be asked to write parliamentary reports, but they can't be compelled to attend Parliament or to write parliamentary reports. And so I think it's a really sad situation because we've ended up with a piece of legislation called The Voice, yet in fact the people who need it most may in fact have no voice.
Yes. You did a post on this and you did cover some of those things.
Yes.
And in addition to that, it says it also allows for an easily expandable number of committees.
Yes.
It's the committee members must be in addition to the elected members, as you were saying.
Yes.
The South Australian Voices in no way supersedes the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander advisory bodies that we already have, which you made.
Yes.
And it's crucial to closely scrutinise the South Australian voice before casting our vote in the referendum. I mean, you know what it feels like? It feels like a jobs for mates thing, because it's not. They're not really elected, are they?
Well, it was
not
interesting
stipulated.
that the ad that I saw for the director of the Voice Secretariat, it was only up on the government website very, very briefly, you know, and it's a very senior role. I think they can earn a package of almost $300,000 for that role. And it definitely begs the question, well, was somebody already in mind for that position? And that's right. When you're looking at that number of people with no real cap on a budget other than to say that it'll be resourced such that it can function, it is a really important time because many people who even would have supported a voice at a state level will be shocked at the size of that voice, the expandable nature of that voice, and to think that that is meant to interplay and overlay with a federal voice as well. We're talking about an enormous number of people involved here. And when you think that only one member of that voice is allowed to come and represent to Parliament, if they indeed do, I think that's going to be very tricky to reach the same position with so many people involved.
Yeah. It's concerning, and I think the biggest takeaway for people is when they see how much a lot of this is taking. I mean, at a federal level, it's $40 billion a year. You know, George Soros he puts in $32 billion in the US, and look how much damage he does with attorneys and all of that. But we do $40 billion a year for Aboriginal people. Just one organisation alone receives $4 billion, and it's like, well, what have you achieved?
Yes, well, exactly. Things have actually gone backwards in certain areas, and certainly there's been very little progress in others. And so I think that brings us back to the point of it is time to do something differently. And I think differently for me is money goes into those organisations that actually produce outcomes, not necessarily based on race-based organisations. And it goes places where there's transparency and accountability. And in fact, we need to completely move away from policies for one group of people over another and go to needs-based support. That's something we haven't tried. The Voice is more of the same on a more out-of-control scale.
Yes. Well, look, your advocacy on this issue was very good. You were very you and Senator Hanson and the whole One Nation team were against this from the start.
That's right.
So kudos to you and the team. I think that's needed, and it's such a shame because on principle, this should have been opposed from the start. I mean, last year we all knew it was a bad idea. Just the basis of it, One thing I love about South Australia is the symbiotic relationship you have with some of the better members of the Liberal Party, like Senator Antic. I reference a photo of you guys at the March for Life protest, and I was like, love that photo. You guys with the community organiser Jodie, who's a lovely lady who does Love Adelaide.
She is, yes.
And she put an excellent ball on in Adelaide a couple of months ago, and it's so good to see a minor right party of conviction, I call them conviction parties, and those in the Liberal Party trying to reform the Liberal Party working together on common issues. What's that relationship like with regards to the Liberal Party? Because obviously it's a broad church. There's also a bunch of Malcolm Turnbulls, Alex Hawkes and Scott Morrisons and Matt Keens in the Liberal Party. Liberals in name only. They're not conservative at all. They've left the We Believe statement of Robert Menzies. What's that relationship like? Because often I love watching you drag them kicking and screaming to the correct position of conviction.
I think that relationship is difficult, probably for the same reason that they find it difficult within themselves, because it is a broad church. I mean, certainly Alex Antic and I have collaborated a couple of times. I mean, that was wonderful, speaking at the Walk for Life event about a bill I have to increase the penalties when we have the death of an unborn child due to prescribed criminal offence. And I certainly believe that at a state level I have the support of the Liberal Party, or the vast majority of the Liberal Party, on that. And so we do collaborate, certainly, which is a really positive thing. I guess there are also times where you see, I think, the fraction within themselves at play. And just going back to the Voice, once I realised that the Voice was going to go through at a state-based level and there was nothing really that could be done vote-wise to stop that, I did put up an amendment to restrict the number of new committees that could be formed. and I didn't get any support from the Liberal Party on that. Right. So there are times when it's also very disappointing, but I know that within themselves there would have been people that wanted to support that too. So I think, you know, my relationship with them is at times positive and at times difficult, and I think that's because their relationship within themselves is difficult.
Right. Yeah, look, one of the encouraging things I've seen in recent years with the Liberals is senators like Senator Antic have been pushing back to take over the Liberal Party by just basically getting their voters to join as members.
Yes.
You know, there's no reason why, if everyone in Australia was a member of a political party, we would fix the country, in my opinion. Whether that's One Nation, whether that's the Greens, whether that's the Liberal Party, the National Party, Labor. If the voters actually join the parties that are in, I think they'd be shocked at how few people control those parties, but they would start to change things. Because when you're a member of a party, like the majors, you get voting rights. You get to vote on who runs. You get to vote for an Alex Antic rather than a Malcolm Turnbull to be your candidate. So, I mean, me publicly, I've advocated for people to join the Liberal Party, but at the elections, vote minor party. And you can pick whether you back the Liberal in your preferencing if they're worth supporting or not. Sometimes there's Liberals that are, you know, you're better off having a Labor person rather than a Liberal person because they're that bad, like Bridget Archer or you know, Trent Zimmerman, who voted against the Religious Freedom Bill. I think that One Nation doesn't get paid its due and the respect when it comes out on issues like The Voice. I think that, you know, minor parties, just as the Greens do with Labor, they drag Labor kicking and screaming to the climate policy agenda.
Yes.
I think that there is a very important relationship with One Nation and other minor parties like Ralph Babbitt and the Liberal Party, keeping them accountable. I see you guys as an insurance policy.
Absolutely, and I think with The Voice, I think I completely agree with you. I mean, credit where credit's due. You know, I did an event recently with Alex Antic on The Voice and why we need to vote no and make sure this referendum doesn't get up, and that was excellent. But I do know, and it was, you know, stated publicly on radio here, that there was some backlash for him doing that within the Liberal Party, and I think that's a really big mistake for the Liberals because they need to show. Really that on certain issues it's not about politics and that it's about real conviction and about that issue. So with regards to The Voice, it's probably overall I feel the collaboration's been a little bit disappointing. If I'm honest, probably Alex accepted from that comment, but you know, it's politics at play.
Yeah. Well, look, you almost had the balance of power in this state. What is the balance of power, guys? It's when neither the Liberal or the Labor Party have a majority of seats when they form government. So they need some of these crossbenchers like the Greens, like the Animal Justice, like One Nation, in order to actually get bills passed. Now, the South Australian election in early last year, you guys had it in March, I think.
Yes.
South Australia, you actually ended up getting the balance of power with the Labor government in the upper house. But the thing was, you lost it because, and it's not completely out of your control, but the Labor government quite shrewdly found a Liberal member of Parliament, one that perhaps wanted the speakership for whatever reason. I don't know why. I know why, but I can't say it. And they picked a Liberal person to be the speaker. The same thing happened in New South Wales in March this year. And what ended up happening was it shifted the balance of power. So rather than Mark Latham and John Ruddock having the balance of power and the minor parties, you know, Libertarian Party and One Nation, the Legalised Cannabis Party now have the balance of power because a Nationals member accepted the speakership because that vote gets taken off the floor, and when in actuality it should have been a Labor person. I would feel a lot more comfortable if you had the balance of power with the Liberal government. Because we both know Labor don't cross the floor.
Yes.
And you would be in a good insurance policy to keep the Liberals on track. We need 3 or 4 more of you in One Nation in this state. That's my opinion.
We do. I mean, even just if we got one, I think we're at the moment definitely on track to get another one at the next election. And I wouldn't put getting another couple elected out of the question either. I think it's looking really positive for us.
8-year terms, right? It's 8-year terms.
It's 8-year terms.
Right.
So not for my election, but certainly for the next election coming up.
Right.
That's my goal, is to get hopefully another 2 members in, and then, you know, certainly we do have a chance at having the balance of power. It's interesting with that comment earlier, looking back on how that shifted in the presidency. choice there for the upper house that the Liberal Party seemed to sort of accept that so easily at the time. It's difficult to understand.
Well, look, we won't talk specifically about South Australia's situation, but in New South Wales, what ended up happening was the Nationals member, it turned out, the Nationals Party were furious. The membership were enraged, and so were the members of Parliament. They were actually threatening to refer him to ICAC, the Corruption Commission at the time, earlier this year, because this is someone who had a very intimate relationship with the Minns family. Chris Minns, who's the Premier of New South Wales, Labor, they holidayed together. Their families holidayed together. There's a great article a few years ago about them both getting elected at the same time and them both being very, very tight with each other, and you can look up that. And this is the sort of stuff that, George Carlin's line comes to mind. It's a big old club and you ain't in it. But it's a reminder that you need to infiltrate the Liberal Party guys and the National Party. You need to take back these parties and remember that they are so entrenched with legislation. They're so entrenched with the funding laws. The rules are stacked against minor parties. But if you pre-select someone for the Liberal Party to run in your seat that's conservative, like Senator Antic, if you secure that person, then a lot of the people that blindly vote Liberal, they're getting your person in.
Yes.
Whereas you can take your vote, there's nothing stopping you being a Liberal member and then going and voting for Sarah Game in this state again. There's nothing to stop you. And that's what I personally encourage people to do, in the Turning Point Network. I think that it's if I was in South Australia, I'd be a member of the Liberal Party, and I would be voting, for yourself at the election. That's how I do it, because you're a good insurance policy. When the Liberal Party are like, I don't know, maybe we should go a bit more to the middle, maybe we should be more centrist. No,
and I think the Liberal Party have been really interested to see just how much, I think, certainly in South Australia, people are crying out for more conservative values. They really are. It's actually not the unpopular thing to do. I think when you hit the street, people really want that. And I mean, I don't want to deviate too much from where we're at, but it's, just even the motion I put up in Parliament that got shot down about there only being two sexes, male and female, and that you cannot actually change between the two. That was extremely well received publicly in society. I mean, you'd be thinking that you might be really targeted for saying something like that. We're made to feel that we can't speak like that anymore. But in fact, I mean, I had, I think, well over 1 million views, on my Twitter for that. 98% of that was positive. And going out in society and speaking to all various groups of people, so many people were happy with that and felt good about that, and that it's really overdue.
Now, look, full credit to you. I mean, Sarah, you're doing God's work, and all the One Nation team are doing a very good job. This isn't like a paid promotion, guys. I genuinely like minor parties, and I like the good Liberals. But look, I've got a lot of time for One Nation. You guys are doing, I've said enough. I love your work. It's very good. But moving on, you're doing a lot for people in this state. We were just talking about The Voice and how it's a bit of a distraction from the real issues happening right now. People are getting agitated. I can't tell you the amount of people I've talked to in my audience. They can't feed their kids. They can't pay their mortgage off. Their mortgage has gone up $2,000, $3,000 since 2020, their mortgage repayments. What are the real issues facing South Australian people, and what are you offering them on a policy basis? Well,
certainly and obviously, cost of living is a really big issue for South Australian people and nationwide. And, one of the things that's making that worse for people is the ridiculous electricity prices in South Australia. I think we've got the most expensive electricity prices across the nation, and that's obviously fueled by our renewable energies policies and the decision to just continually subsidise renewable energy rather than look at other strategies. But when I have asked people, well, what is the number one issue concerning you? Actually, a lot of people tell me it's education of our children in schools. And I was at an event just recently, Education for Kids, where, a couple of hundred people turned up because people are very concerned about the education of our children in schools, and particularly the lack of rigorous academia. I think the lack of discipline, the lack of, I think teachers don't feel that they can take authority and command respect anymore with their students. I mean, having been a teacher, because I taught for a few years overseas, and actually it was one of the best experiences I ever had. And what I learnt from that is children and young people, I taught year 10, 11 and 12. Children and young people like to be in a learning environment. You know, I was really worried actually because I was quite strict. I mean, certainly we had a good time as well, but I was quite strict in my class. And when it came around to parent-teacher night, I thought, goodness me, this is going to be terrible.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing evening. The kids absolutely loved being in my class because actually they were learning and in a learning environment. That's what children need. They like discipline. They like knowing that there's not going to be lots of chatter when it's time to learn and listen. And they like feeling that you believe in them and that you've got high expectations. I think we've gone too far to this sort of victimhood and pandering, you know, that we can't expect too much from young people. They might be having a difficult time. Maybe their home life is difficult. Maybe they're having a mental health issue. But actually the best thing we can do for young people who are having a difficult time at home or struggling is to give them a really good, solid education and prepare them for life, to have every opportunity at hand. Yeah. And obviously the other area facing our education system at the moment, and is certainly going on, is this gender fluidity teaching. Yeah. I mean, I discovered here in our state curriculum in year 7, the children are asked to, there's the gender bread man or the gender unicorn, where they're basically asked to match, in year 7, what gender they feel in their mind versus their heart versus their biology, which I find unbelievable.
It's nuts. And I mean, at a time when, divorce rates are higher than ever, kids are confused, kids are looking for stability.
Yes.
And something that's as binary as sex is no longer stable.
That's right.
It's like kids, I mean, I'm surprised we don't have more kids that are, I mean, maybe this is why anxiety and depression is at record highs.
Yes.
We're spending more than ever on education. And instead of getting...
And mental health in the education system.
And it's worse than ever.
Yes, it's getting worse than ever.
It's worse than ever. And I mean, guys, if you haven't seen this before, I showed this in my recent New Zealand interviews, because this is happening in the whole Anglosphere.
Yes.
These are the sorts of books that are out there, guys. Here you go. You've got The Queer Chameleon, which is, to your point, the rainbow unicorn.
Yes.
Very similar. It talks about those different genders and all that.
Yes.
I know you and I, you're going to go through some of these, after we're done.
Yes.
But this is the sort of stuff that's being sold at our state libraries. They're in our schools. Here you go. Queer and Queer. Very good. The authors of this are very much enjoying, I'm sure they're going to enjoy many more sales from this, but I bought these so you guys don't have to. Granddad's Pride. I mean, seriously, like who... Did anyone ask? This one I know definitely was taught in a school, actually, the school of my boss, actually, his child. My Shadow is Purple. Now, this particular book is one that it's a lot softer, but you can see how they start at a very young age with this particular stuff. Here you go, the pronoun book. And then you've got like a little Muslim girl at the bottom there. They are targeting Middle Easterners. I mean, there was a big video recently about another book in the UK where they talk about how to talk to Muslims specifically on this topic, because they know a lot of Middle Easterners, Christians or Muslims, there's a lot of pushback on this. This is where our tax dollars are going, and while on the one hand we can't teach Christianity and the values that made Western society great,
yes,
they teach this other religion.
Yes.
And the rainbow is a Christian concept. I mean, since when did we allow them to just take the rainbow and just use it?
When did we agree that this is what we wanted in our schools?
Never. They just did it.
That's right.
But it's our fault, isn't it? And this is the crux of it. Where responsibility has been abdicated, opportunity lurks. And if you don't seize the opportunity, the totalitarians will. That sounds great because it's not from me, it's from Jordan Peterson in his recent book, 12 More Rules for Life. We abdicated our responsibility to educate our kids. We outsourced it to the state when we should have been doing it at home because it took 2 incomes to earn a living.
Yes.
Look, once women hopped into the workforce, you needed 2 incomes in order to compete in the housing market and get a loan, because other people were starting to do that as well and get the edge. And no longer can we have one income supporting a family of 13. And like my mum's family. Lebanese, they have a lot of kids. But, you know, the education department in America, where is the fight back there? People are going to school boards, they're fighting back. What does that fight back look like in South Australia? What are you encouraging parents to do to push back against this?
Well, I think you've made a few really good points, and I just want to expand on one of them.
Sure.
And I think the fact is that most people are struggling just to survive. So their ability now to remain vigilant about their children and their children's education is limited. We don't... That's right, women are working, men are working, they might be working 2 jobs, they might still be barely managing to pay their electricity bills and their rent, and they just don't have the time or energy, I think, to create a level of fight back. In terms of what we can try and ask those people to do, I think you have to be really vigilant about what's going on in school and ask those questions. What books, maybe go into your school's library and have a look at what
100%.
books are actually available, because
Absolutely.
you might be very surprised to find the content that's easily available and at reach to all various age ranges. Certainly in South Australia, I want to hear from parents who do discover those books or content in those schools, and definitely happy to help advocate and write for them, because I know that people have limited time and limited ability to do that themselves.
Absolutely. No, look, I think one of the things I've been very encouraged by, a lady in South Australia was the first that reached out to me about these books.
Yes.
And specifically the sex ones, the really
Yes.
lewd ones, like that one that was a Big W, all about sex, that Primod broke the story on. Disgusting
Why
stuff.
are we teaching children who are not even at a legal age to have sex about these really intimate details? I mean, it's just wrong.
It's criminal. I mean, can you tell me something? Because I don't have kids. You guys know I don't have kids, and I'm not in a relationship right now. I'm looking at what's going on with parents, and it struck me the other day. I was showing these very books to a father, divorced. He has 3 kids, young kids, and when I showed them to him, some of the more lewd ones, his jaw dropped, took his glasses off, and he was enraged. And he Portuguese guy, he was enraged, and I was like, do you somewhat feel guilty? Because obviously, we've outsourced, the
That's
education
right.
of our kids, because it's difficult, cost of living and all that stuff, and over the last maybe 10 years, it's difficult to keep a living. You've outsourced your kids to be educated by the state. State, because you couldn't do it. Do you feel guilty that you haven't been able to educate your kids, which isn't quite your fault? And he said, yes. He said, I didn't know this was being done. How, I need to assess the damage. I need a dilapidation report on how far the damage is.
Yes.
Just one day your kid could just turn on you like a dime. I want to get a sex change.
Yes.
And some schools, they facilitate it behind the parents' back in America,
Well, certainly. I mean, one of the first things I did when I got elected was go around and speak to schools, primary schools, secondary schools, and all various groups of, socioeconomic background. And I wanted to know what the main issues were. And right back then, principals, and they were actually quite nervous to tell me as well, was told in confidence and privacy that they'd seen this enormous rise of young people identifying with the different gender or wanting to come to school in a different way. And in their opinion, and they told me that confidentially, they really felt that often there was a family or mental health issue that was there, but they were afraid for their own jobs if they didn't support these young people in, that transition, or at least that social transition of how they wanted to present themselves. I've seen parents come and speak to me because, they can't talk to anybody safely about these issues without being frankly bullied. I mean, I've had a father come and speak to me because, comments he'd made about his son's transition, who he loved his son, obviously, and unconditionally as well, which is why he wanted to do the right thing by him. But he wasn't able to speak openly to anybody. It's very isolating for these parents. And certainly schools, my understanding is here as well in South Australia that if the parent is seen to not be supportive of that child's transition, then the school can take some leadership over that.
Yeah. Oh, it's tough being a parent. I mean, just when you're thinking, it's hard enough trying to work out what the right milk is, what the right, diet, and just to add to the headache,
It's scary, and I think the idea that, and sorry to, but
sure.
we get told, it's not confusing. Children know how they are, so it's not confusing to expose them to all this, material and ideas early on. It won't confuse them, but that just makes absolutely no sense. I mean, we see
confusing me.
Exactly. Adults are confused all the time, and we see adults come out confused about all sorts of things, don't we? Well into their adulthood. So the idea that this wouldn't be highly confusing for children, particularly children going through a difficult time, is ridiculous.
It's nuts. I mean, have you guys heard of moon gender? Do you know what moon gender is?
No.
Moon gender is where during the day you're one gender and at night you're another gender.
Right.
I mean, there's so what do you got? Demisexual, intersexual, genderqueer, gender fluid, gay, demi-gender. I honestly, guys, if it's confusing me, it's going to confuse a lot of different people out there.
And I think with falling standards on basic reading and writing, there's actually, in my opinion, no place for this. Parents are in charge of the moral and ethical teaching of their children, and unfortunately, even if you're sending your child to a faith school, you're not protected from this.
Not at all. It's coming through the Catholic schools, guys. I can confirm that in Sydney.
Yeah.
In many of the schools in southwest Sydney, it's getting so bad, and I haven't broken this story yet, so you're hearing it first. There is a school in southwest Sydney where there's a huge ethnic population, specifically Muslim. A lot of the girls, they wear hijabs, they wear burqas in the school, and there's a transgender kid there at the school, a boy that's become a girl. And anyone that knows about Muslim culture, Muslim tradition, the ones that wear the burqas and the hijabs, the only time you can take that off at the school is in the bathroom. And so you can adjust it and, now if there's a dude in there, a boy that's become a girl, and he's using that bathroom, the girls can't do that anymore. And so what's happened in this specific school, I mean, there's going to be like an inflection point, and it's going to happen in Western Sydney. I know it. I can see it coming a mile off. And this specific school, the girls, they can't use that bathroom anymore, so they're all using the nurse's bathroom, the one tiny nurse's bathroom in the whole school. They can't use the other bathrooms because they don't know if the transgender dude's going to be in there. This is going to come to a head. Let me give you an example. Two-spirit. Two-spirit is used by some Indigenous cultures to describe traditional cultural understanding of gender and sexuality outside Western binaries. As these traditions are culturally and spiritually specific, two-spirit cannot be claimed or used by people not from this heritage. So now you've got like they're going to have like a intersectional Jesus. It's just what we see coming through is confusing me.
It's very confusing.
And so, look, guys, if you're having kids, have more kids. That's the only way that we're going to breed this out. But at the same time, keep an eye on them and look at what's going on in your schools, your libraries, and your education, and grill these teachers. Grill them, please. And if there's a school board, apply to be on your school board, run to be on a school board, and fight against this stuff. Because if you don't, they're going to get away with it. They're going to steal your kids because they don't have kids. Remember that. That's have your kids.
And pay attention about groups that are coming into schools, because I think parents are often asked about, excursions out of schools, but they're not told and informed who's coming, into schools to speak to children.
Honestly, it's nuts. Moving on, men's mental health is something you have been very passionate about.
Yes.
You've talked about how men are very much left out of society. They're more likely to commit suicide. They're more likely to succeed at committing suicide. They are people that get injured at work more often, 90% of the time, I think, 90% to 10%. And, there aren't really many at all mental health organisations for men. Why are you so passionate about this? Because I saw a lot of your commentary in the Men's Health Week this week, Mental Health Week. And what do you think needs to be done in this particular area?
Well, when I got into Parliament, I didn't set out to become a men's health advocate, but I did set out to make, meaning of my time and position. And I just found it all sort of began really for me when I made what I thought was, frankly, just an ordinary speech about, men and men's mental health. And it really went, viral for me at the time, hundreds of thousands of views and a huge amount of positivity. And I suddenly started for the first time going out in the street, and I would have men come up to me and say, oh, thank you so much for that speech that you gave. And my barista, who'd been making my coffee for every morning and never noticed me at all, said, oh, you're that girl who's been speaking about men's mental health. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. I didn't, in my ignorance, actually realise what a massive issue it was. I'd been bogged down in my own survival, managing my children and my family life and the transition.
That's amazing, with the barista. Wow.
Yes, exactly. So I started being recognised. It obviously took off. At that time, most of my videos that I uploaded had maybe a few thousand views at best. So to suddenly get one that had hundreds of thousands of views, and I think, gone possibly towards 1 million now across my social media, I realised this was an untapped area and an area of great need where there needed to be advocacy. And the more I've looked into it, it's actually amazing that nobody's really speaking about this. And it's really interesting that it's taboo. I mean, as you said, men actually live shorter lives than women. So they're living for less time. They're living less healthy lives. They're taking their life more. They're putting their hand up. The vast majority of people in our defence force who are prepared to defend our country are men. They're putting their hand up for dangerous and hazardous but necessary work, and I've actually seen statistics where men are responsible for 97% of workplace deaths. And yet it's taboo to talk about men and what men need. I mean, when I raise it in Parliament, I'm always laughed out of there when I've asked for a minister for men and an office for men. I mean, we have a minister for women and an office for women. Why do we not have it for men and men's issues? I think that old, that feeling that men have it so good, if men have it so good, why are they taking their life so often? Why are they living shorter lives? Why do we invest more money in the health of women when women are living longer and healthier lives than men? So it just really made no sense at all.
Well, I guess, if I can play devil's advocate, the lefties across the chamber, particularly the Greens, would be like, well, men are always the predators. They're always the ones in jail. They're the most violent in our society. Toxic masculinity is running rampant through our universities, and, women are getting raped everywhere and sexually assaulted, and we have to protect the kids. On the kids' point, you are a huge advocate for protection of kids, and you sat down with, who was it, Simon Schrampel?
Yes.
Recently?
Yes, exactly, to talk about child protection. But just on your note there, I think the failure of men certainly is beginning right down in school level. I mean, I put a Freedom of Information request in not that long ago, which was incentivised by looking at children of disadvantage. But what came out of that Freedom of Information that was really interesting was that there was certain groups of years where I think 82% of students that were excluded from school were boys. I mean, we can't just say, I think it's ridiculous to just say, well, boys, men are bad. Like, why is this happening? Why is that behaviour happening in schools? Why is it not being managed? It's a failure of boys from an early age right through school. I think 75% of suspensions were boys.
Right.
And so with regard to men always being the perpetrator, I mean, I certainly think there's a huge amount of evidence now that one of the reasons that men take their lives is after relationship breakdown, fear of losing their children, or in fact losing access to their children. Yep. And again, this seems to be an issue that we're not allowed to talk about.
We have no patience for that in One Nation, do we? And I mean, me personally, I definitely don't like that idea. The amount of men I've met, 40, 50 years old, haven't seen their kids for 1, 2, 3 years. 3 kids, young. It's nuts. And that goes into the family law court, which I want to talk about.
Yes.
Senator Hanson's been very good on this. She's advocated for a royal commission at a federal level into this, so we can have some data, so that we can get people's understanding on it. And I think she may have done a poll at the time, and she said, do you guys want me to pursue this? And she got like 75% said, yes, we want a royal commission on the family law court system and its impact on men. What can you do on a state level? Obviously, you can do more at a federal level and a state level, but what can be done?
Well, exactly, and I've certainly started trying to get that ball rolling here. It's difficult. I mean, this concept of parental alienation, where a child is alienated from a good parent for no reason really other than the vindictiveness of the other parent, is a real phenomena. And if we want to address mental health, and in particular men's mental health, and if we want to address suicide, we've got to be looking at parental alienation and the alienation of fathers from their children. It's a real thing. I mean, I know firsthand really good fathers that have been, and parental alienation can affect women as well, but I certainly know really good fathers who've been alienated from their children for no good reason and seen that devastating consequence. Even getting our parliament to acknowledge, and the Labor government to acknowledge, that parental alienation exists is difficult. You know, there's this concept going around that really the people who complain of parental alienation are really limited to a group of domestically violent fathers who are dangerous and are disgruntled from family court outcomes. And like I said, I know this not to be the case. Just within my own circle, I know of really good men who'd be great fathers who've been alienated from their children. One thing that I do want, I certainly have a piece of legislation asking for a commission of inquiry into this state. We'll probably need the balance of power at the next election, if I'm honest, to get that really through. But I certainly see no reason that every family that's going through separation and divorce needs to be educated on the mental harm that happens to children when they don't have that positive relationship with both parents. And we're not educated. People get separated, they get divorced all the time, and there's no mandatory education. And I think that absolutely has to be the basic place to start.
It breaks my heart. I mean, we all know people that have gone through this. I've helped a number of men in providing them with character references, because obviously I run an organisation, and I've been in the courts with men that haven't seen their kid for over a year. They're 3 kids often, and I understand why you've got to be cautious with men and AVOs, and when women accuse men of beating them up and all that sort of stuff. But this has gone too far. This has gone way too far. I mean, to the point that we have video evidence, we have documentation, we have evidence of mismanagement from the mother's side, but because she accused the father of beating him up, where there's no evidence of that, whereas there's evidence of her beating him up often. I've been in the courts sitting next to these men that I provide character references for, that I've known for many years, and they can't say anything, they can't defend themselves. Often I think their lawyers should be sacked, they don't do a good job. And I felt that feeling of, I just want to shout and tell them, no, this is not what's happened, that's not what happened, she's lying. Here's the evidence.
Yes.
And I feel you, men. I don't have kids, but I've seen the good and the bad with this. And in many of these situations, there are very good stories where we get the kids back to the father. But it breaks my heart so much. And honestly, I understand why suicide is so high with this.
Yes.
With men, and why they get homicidal.
Oh, if someone stopped me seeing my children, I mean, I really live for my children, I'll be honest. I really live for my children.
Yeah.
So obviously it's going to, excite an extreme reaction, I'd say, in a lot of people if they were prevented from seeing their children, which also begs the question of whether we should be asking people right at the beginning to think, when we're doing all this education and all these, prenatal classes, and when women are pregnant and you go off and you get educated about how to look after the baby, I think that's a good time to ask people to think about, their commitment to having each other involved in that child, and whether you make some kind of declaration then at a positive time. And really that should stand, in my view, unless there's evidence, between then and the separation, that those people are involved, because it's just too difficult. And I think many men are just terrified of going to family court. It bankrupts them for a start, and the mental turmoil of going, and certainly the outcome for men who do make it to family court it isn't good a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I mean, with these lawyers, there's no incentive to solve this, well and efficiently. I mean, you could have a man and a woman. They're
That's
like,
right.
all right, they both got their legal counsel. What's the deal? This is the deal. Yeah, look, I just want this. Yeah, I just want that. I just want this back. You can have the kids on this days, and I can have them on that days. I'll sort this out. You sort that out. No worries. The lawyers are like, no, hang on, that was too quick.
Yes.
We need to, and they get into their ears, and they're like, I reckon they're going to come after this, and then the other one gets in there, and then the lawyers get more fees.
And I think it's education. It is education. There are certainly people who are going to want to do the wrong thing despite being educated, but I really think a lot of people, when they're separating, it's obviously a very emotional time for many, and they need to be explained that the right thing to do by your child is to ensure that wherever possible, they've got a positive and good relationship with the other parent. It's essential for the mental health and well-being of the child.
Yeah, and that's the thing. As you said, the damage to the kid,
yes,
the kids, the importance of having a father figure in their household.
Yes, absolutely. Role models for our boys again, and for the self-esteem of daughters, it's crucial.
Do you think there's a deliberate assault in the family unit with regards to that? I mean, some people, they like myself, I buy into the theory that cultural Marxists are breaking down the bedrock of society, which is the family, which builds strong churches, strong communities, and obviously if you want to break the family down, if you were to take one person out, it'd be the father. In America, I think it's the best predictor of being homeless, being incarcerated. 90% of people that are homeless, they were fatherless as a kid. 70% of people incarcerated, the best predictor is, no father. Do you think that this is a deliberate assault to destroy Australia and the Anglosphere from within, or do you think this is just modernity? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I honestly don't probably really know, but I would say that there definitely is culturally and in society now a lack of reverence and a lack of respect for the nuclear family. I mean, giving your children a nuclear family with a present mother and father is the greatest gift that you can give your children.
Yeah.
I think that if you grow up without that, I'm not sure that that's a wound that really ever heals for people.
Yeah.
We need our mothers and fathers all our life, in fact, but particularly as children.
Can I do a hard segue back to something when we're talking about the cost of living? You mentioned energy.
Yes.
Funny thing about South Australia, doesn't it have like 40% of the world's uranium or something? Like something crazy?
Yet we have got no desire here, apparently, from the Labor government to investigate nuclear energy, which I think is basic. I mean, nuclear energy generating capacity is actually increasing around the world. It's incredibly safe. It's actually safer than pretty much any other form of energy, and it's reliable, and yet the Labor government seemed completely against it. I mean, the Premier did try. I mean, he did make a few comments, I think, a while back that did seem at first glance supportive of nuclear energy, but very quickly Albanese came out and clarified that there'll be no support for nuclear energy from this Labor government.
Yeah, nuclear subs, no worries. Nuclear energy, no.
That's right, and now's the time to be doing it. When we're doing the nuclear submarines, this is the time to be investigating that skills need and that infrastructure.
We actually had some breaking news coming into this interview. You probably haven't heard this, but I think Donald Trump, who might win the next, he's the favourite to win the presidency in next year's election in November. He was talking to someone about it might actually be illegal what they did in selling the Australians technology to the nuclear energy. So that might be in jeopardy, the nuclear subs program. Which I wasn't expecting from Trump, but who knows? He's a bit of a America First sort of guy, so I mean, it makes sense. Sarah, what do you think is something that we're not talking about that we really ought to be in South Australia or in Australia as a whole?
That we're not talking about that we really ought to be.
Yeah, it was a real curveball. I didn't tell you about this.
Yes. Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I think a lot of what we're talking about are things that we should be talking about that we haven't been allowed to talk about. I think, not to be repetitive, but going back to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issue, I think we're not talking about the fact that certainly I believe, and I mean I don't believe or support a voice, treaty or the truth telling. And certainly if we go back to the South Australian piece of legislation, it does state within there that the South Australian government has a commitment to all three, and obviously we've implemented the voice. Who knows really what treaty or truth telling looks like. Certainly I believe in people's ability to maintain culture where it's harmonious to others living around them and is conducted in a respectful way, and certainly accurate history telling. I think we're not talking about the success of many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders integrating in the rest of society, contributing to the rest of society, and that in fact that it's okay now. We should be having a goal to move away from that sort of perpetual victimhood that we want to keep people in, and that people, no matter what our race, heritage or background, or no matter what trauma we face, really the only way out is to take personal responsibility for your own life. And actually if we look at children and mental health in the school system, I think the victimhood is going on there. It's certainly not and that's for all children. I think it's become very self-indulgent, very much focused on what might be making you feel bad, and that it's okay to talk about those things, which of course it is. But at some point you have to ask yourself, and I think if we want happy, resilient children who contribute to society, the shift needs to go back to people's responsibility to contribute, to be grateful, to be responsible for your own life.
Yeah, I was having a discussion with privately an Aboriginal bloke, and I was talking to him about this referendum. He's voting no. He doesn't want to vote for this thing, and we started talking about the good members of Parliament at a federal level fighting against this. And I said, "Oh, look, man, Senator Hanson, she was on this very early on. She's doing good work." And almost immediately it was like, "Oh, I don't like Senator Hanson," and the usual tropes about Senator Hanson that the mainstream media have perpetuated, that she's a racist, she's a this, she's a that. And obviously that's not true, because
totally not true.
Always picks the phone up whenever I need something, talking to her staff and all that, and she's always been phenomenal. And she's fighting. She stood up against the vaccine mandates and all that stuff when no one else would. What did you say to a man like this on the Aboriginal issue? I assured him, Senator Hanson is someone that wants genuine outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We haven't been doing good enough. We're spending too much. What would you say to this particular guy on this issue?
Well, certainly, I mean, I'm familiar with that issue, obviously, because I've gone around and spoken to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and way back at the start of the year, went down to various groups and missions, and I always explain, and people know Pauline. I mean, she's done a very good job at getting herself known. So although they might not have heard of me or even known that One Nation was in our parliament here yet, certainly when I explained from the beginning that I was there to talk about the voice and the fact that I was from One Nation, Pauline Hanson, they knew immediately. And there was a bit of a reaction, if I'm honest, from some people, but I actually found that was very easily overturned by speaking in person, and I'm sure that Pauline would have the same situation. It, as you say, is easy to grab on to a couple of media headlines, and people are busy, right? Like, you can't blame people. People are busy. They don't have time to look into everything thoroughly themselves. They just flick through the media, see what's been said, and that's perception, unfortunately, is everything. But I found on talking to these Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups, when you explain, we're not against the voice, but we do want better outcomes for people and for everybody. I think that was extremely well received. I mean, I was invited back to a lot of these, groups. I haven't had time, unfortunately, to go back yet, but I certainly will. And the message that I had, which is the One Nation message of why we're against the voice that we talked about earlier, that was very well received, because what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people want is, my view, is they want to be included. They want participation, and they want better, tangible outcomes for their people. And I certainly didn't get any impression that it all had to be about the voice. It's about what is going to work.
That's what I love about Senator Hanson. I mean, she's in Parliament. If you cross her, she will politically kill you. But when she's out in the public and she's having those genuine one-on-one conversations with people, and talks to specific issues in a private setting. She's lovely. Oh my God. And she's very well read on these topics.
Yes. And you want people who are authentic. I think that's what I've certainly seen from my foray into the South Australian public, is people really just are grateful if they can see that a politician cares genuinely, is hardworking, and says what they actually mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's definitely Pauline.
I think there's I can't remember who said it, but there's a few people on the Labor side. They said, who I really respect out of the whole, in the Parliament, I actually respect Pauline, because I always knew where I stood with her.
Yeah.
Whereas everyone else, they just stab you in the back. Whereas Pauline and Senator Roberts, and they exude authenticity and genuineness. And I've got a lot of time for them. But I did want to ask one last thing. You're a mother.
Yes.
You used to be a teacher.
Yes.
Which country was that in?
The UK.
Right.
And also a veterinarian was my main job.
Oh, you were a veterinarian as well?
Yes.
Oh, you were. Yes, you were too. You talked about that in the Parliament once.
Yes.
Early on. It's amazing how many topics you've covered that are often not associated with One Nation. That's something I've really enjoyed about watching yourself. And also Ricky Lee for One Nation of Victoria. She loves talking about water. Farmer background, so obviously. But the question I want to ask is, how have you transitioned? As a mother, as someone that has experience outside the Parliament, you're not a career politician. It's been refreshing watching you in the Parliament from day dot. I've been watching you after the South Australian election last year. How have you found it, schedule-wise, balancing kids, working, getting across the detail of legislation that often come up? It's that thick,
Yeah. Well, certainly, look, I want to start by saying I feel no politician should complain. If you're a politician in this state, right, you've got secure employment and you're well paid. So you're a privileged person, and that's very different than being an elite person. And you've got a responsibility to give back and contribute. And I think really that if you found somebody who genuinely thought they had a right to complain as a politician, that should be an alarm bell. I mean, that said, of course, there are certain things that are difficult, but I think one of the reasons it's gone so well for me is I've worked in small business and I've worked in teaching where you're on a schedule. And so for me, I've really tried to approach this job. People tried to tell me, look, Sarah, you've got 8 years, but that's not how I see the job. The way I see the job from the moment that I got elected was I felt, and it was a good thing, and you mentioned Jordan Peterson, and I love him too, and he talks about burden as well, and burden is a positive thing. I mean, if you want a meaningful life, he says, take the biggest burden that you can, and I completely agree with that, and certainly my children, I love them, but they are part of the burden and of responsibility that I carry, in this life. Yeah. So I certainly felt from the day that I got elected, this burden, there was this group of people that had voted for One Nation that were really excited to have a One Nation member in Parliament. Those people, a lot of them are struggling, they weren't being paid the salary that I was about to be paid. I mean, I hadn't been earning very much before that, let's be clear, because vets don't actually earn very much money.
Yeah, that's right.
So I felt that pressure from the beginning and that burden from the beginning, but like I say, that in a positive way, that yes, I had 8 years, but every day matters on a moral and ethical level. And when you're in small business, what you did, 10 minutes ago or in the next half an hour, that matters. And so that's the way I've treated my position each day, every day. What am I doing now? What am I doing the next half hour? I want to make every day count and contribute, because that's what we owe people in South Australia who voted for you. When you're sitting there as a privileged person, earning a good salary with secure employment, that's what you owe the South Australian public. That said, of course, it can be difficult because I've got 3 small children, and I've got the number of times I have to say no, unfortunately, to a radio interview that's on at breakfast time, and I really have to get my name out there, but I'm dropping my children to school, is difficult. I've actually found people to be, on the whole, really accommodating. But certainly, my children have had to learn, and I think, again, it's a good thing for them to learn that sometimes, they have to accommodate me and what I'm doing. So they've come in and they've been in Parliament and they've loved it. So there are difficult aspects, but I more see them as I don't like to fail or to feel that I'm not representing people properly or that you're letting the public down. That's really what, if I'm honest, stresses me or makes me feel concerned.
Yeah.
So trying to do my best, honestly.
No, look, from day dot, you've been in the job a year and a half now. You've been very transparent and authentic with your audience, in my opinion. And I think your social media has become a weapon that you've been able to keep, yourself accountable so you can communicate with your audience. And I encourage you guys, follow your members of parliament you like. Follow Sarah Game on Facebook, Instagram, and X or Twitter.
Yes.
Are you anywhere else? YouTube?
Yes, I'm on YouTube, and I think we've tried to start Rumble or something.
Rumble, yes.
We've tried to start that. Yes, but I've only got a few followers on there at the moment. But certainly trying to get out there.
Awesome, guys. Well, it starts there. I'm going to include Sarah's social media in the description of this so you can find it. But Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the slings and arrows. It's often a thankless job, being a member of parliament, even though it is a secure financial job. But being in a minor party, your name's going to be dragged through the mud. You're going to be always considered a disruptor. But ultimately, there's a lot of people you're speaking up for, and they thank you for your service. So thank you so much.
Thank
God bless
you so much.
Cheers.